Today on episode 17 of the Missionary Coach Show, we'll be continuing our Missionary Stories series with reading chapter 9 of Rudi Lack's book, Breakthrough, called Call to the Chinese. In Volunteer Christian Mission since 1999, I'm your missionary coach, Bill Hutchison. This is the show where we talk about all things missions related, from preparations, travel, training, relationships, building a support network, testimonies, and stories, and more. So, again, thank you very much for joining us. If you're following along in your own book, we are on page 113, and it is chapter 9, called Call to the Chinese. So, it's I'm loving Rudi's book. I'm personally finding it to be quite inspirational. Definitely going to be passing this book on to my kids because I'm sure they don't want to listen because they get a bit sick of my voice during the day. I got 3 kids. So they've been introduced to some aspects of missions, obviously through me being in missions since 1999. They were all born into it. So they've seen some aspects, but the stuff that Rudi has gone through is a bit different than the stuff that I'm involved in. So again, we are on using the archive.org page, so you can follow along on the screen and read along, or like I said, we're on page 113. And if you're listening, thank you very much. You can find us on all podcast platforms just by looking for Missionary Coach Show. You should be able to find it there where you can subscribe. And if you're watching elsewhere, subscribe, hopefully leave a comment. I did actually get a comment on the last one, which was exciting, from someone who is a full-time missionary in Japan for many, many years. So I'm going to be emailing him, hopefully getting some stories off of him. He was offered to send me his memoir, and also he has a book that has been released on Amazon. So it's kind of exciting, and hopefully we'll be able to tell you some stories from him and his experiences serving as a missionary in Japan. But for now, we're going to continue to read Rudi Lack's book and see what happens next. The revival continued unabated as we reached out beyond the township of Soroti into surrounding villages. So he's in Uganda. Right now, that's where they've gone to preach the gospel. So the church building, and every village seemed to have one, was usually nothing more than a crude open frame structure comprised of a coarse thatched roof propped up on roughly hewn poles. The moment Dan started strumming his guitar, barefoot, raggedly dressed youngsters came running. They stayed, happily twisting their black limbs around the poles, eyes in wide open intrigue as we sang our songs, and with the help of our African interpreters, told personal stories of how God had moved in their lives, or in our lives. The villagers sat on the ground while hens scratched in the dirt around them. An occasional dog, cat, or even a goat or pig meandered through the open congregation. Others hung back, eavesdropping from a less threatening distance in front of the huts. Almost every time we challenged our listeners to make Jesus Lord of their lives, some would respond. Then a door was opened to us we had never anticipated or thought possible. One morning, the telephone rang at the mission house. I picked up the handpiece and put it to my ear. Lack. "Are you the leader of the youth of the mission group?" A voice I did not recognize asked. "Yes, that's me," I answered. "Who was this?" As if hearing my unspoken question, the caller immediately introduced himself. "I'm a television producer with Uganda National TV." I was puzzled and a little nervous as to why a TV producer would be contacting me. "I understand you have a singing group. I would like to invite you to perform on our station." I gulped. Dan had proved his skill on the guitar, and as a group our singing had some merit, but we were not professional. Yes, I stumbled out an answer. I did not want to give him a false impression, but neither did I want to turn down such a unique opportunity. We're a group of young people here in Uganda to share the Christian message, but we're not professional. In Africa in 1971, anyone from abroad was considered elite. On that basis alone, we were accepted. A recording session was arranged. We decided not to try anything fancy, but to put together a program along the same lines we had been presenting in the villages. The bright lights and cameras were more nerve-wracking than the open eyes of attentive African villagers, but we got through. The television producer seemed satisfied with our performance. We'd only made one stipulation, that a contact address be screened at the end. This way people could write in for more literature. Well, the producer assured me they would do this. I was aware that a higher authority might edit the address out and thus make our performance a less effective tool for evangelism. The evening our program was due to be screened, we were on the road between villages. We pulled over at a roadside cafe and along with 50 Africans watched it on black and white television. There were embarrassed giggles from the girls and pokes and snide remarks from the guys as we saw ourselves on screen for the first time. But despite the jokes, we all agreed that the presentation came over very well. The most comforting aspect for me was to see the address appear at the end of the program. Our performance was screened a number of times over the following weeks. In fact, it proved so popular that people began humming our songs on the streets. Our television appearance also opened other invitations to perform. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect was the mail response. Within days of it first being aired, letters began pouring in from people who had been deeply touched by the program. One businessman wrote, "I've just seen your TV program and felt compelled to write to you immediately. I'm at wit's end with worry and remorse over what I have done. I am a prominent businessman. Wealth, position, and to some extent power is mine. But over the last few years, I've been increasingly unhappy and have felt that there is no purpose in life. I have had nothing to do with religion or the church since I was married. In your program tonight, I saw for the first time that those could be solutions to my misery. I've done all the bad things those happy people talk about, and worse. In particular, I behaved really badly towards one of my competitors, who still seems to be friendly towards me in spite of my actions. I can't bear to face my business associates because of what I have done. Is it possible to help me by a visit? Please come after 6 p.m. any day of the week." I was thrilled personally to follow up such correspondence, as well as to send out appropriate literature. Our days were full and satisfying. New schools and villages kept opening to us as a result of our television exposure. We continued to conduct street rallies and sell our literature in the marketplace. Now that the spiritual resistance had been broken, we had more than enough to keep our team occupied for our final 2 weeks in Rudi. For me, personally, however, my heart was being stirred in a new direction. Ever since I heard about the Chinese communists working on the Tanzam railway project, I could not get them out of my mind, and I had been trying to figure out a way to reach them. The nation of Tanzania bordered on the south of Uganda. I discovered that one could take a 3-hour bus ride from Rudi to the Ugandan capital of Kampala, and from there, an hour-and-a-half plane flight to Dar es Salaam, the capital of Tanzania. I could be there in less than 5 hours. In my heart, a plan was brewing. I could leave the team in Rudi and go for a short fact-finding tour by myself into Tanzania. I was sure that Floyd would give me permission to go. After all, he'd been the one who had encouraged us to take every opportunity we could to evangelize. And, as Brother Andrew had said, this was a God-given opportunity. The bamboo curtain effectively kept us from going into China, but there was nothing to stop us from reaching out to the Chinese here in Africa. I had not said anything to the rest of the team, but as the plan solidified in my heart, I became increasingly convinced God was speaking to me. However, I needed to be sure, so I decided to stay up one night after the others had gone to bed and spent time asking God specifically if it was His will for me to make this fact-finding tour. Shafts of moonlight pierced the latticed window, reflecting eerie crisscross patterns on the otherwise bare walls of the living room. In the semi-darkness, I knelt down by one of the mahogany dining chairs. A thin straw mat was my only protection from the polished concrete floor. I could have chosen to sit on one of the more comfortable cane chairs, but I was already tired and did not want to fall asleep. I spent time preparing my heart, checking my motives, and asking God to show me any unconfessed sin in my life. Had I spoken harshly to anyone or been critical in any way? Immediately, I recalled an overly sharp remark I had made earlier that day to one of our team. The person had been slack in carrying out a duty, and I felt my retort was justified. Now, under the conviction of the Holy Spirit, I recognized my attitude was wrong. I quickly repented. Please forgive me, Lord. I also made a mental note to ask that person's forgiveness the next day. This was such an important question. I did not want anything to stop me from hearing accurately from God. I took a stand in the name of Jesus against the interference of the satanic forces. From our exposure to the high level of occult worship and witchcraft in Africa, and our own night drama, I had become aware as never before about the importance of exercising our authority over Satan. I also spent the time quietly worshiping God and focusing my thoughts on His greatness and glory. I wanted to make sure I was absolutely in tune with Him. Having thoroughly prepared myself, I finally felt ready to ask my vital question. By now, the full moon had moved higher in the sky and was projecting its soft latticed reflections through the window onto the floor beside me. Lord, do you want me to reach out to the Chinese in Tanzania? I waited quietly for an answer, the silence disturbed only by the orchestra of Africa's night music, a 1,000-strong chorus of crickets interspersed by an occasional owl hoot. As the minutes ticked by, I continued to wait. Then, clear and sharp, a scripture reference came to mind, Isaiah 52. I had no idea what it contained, so picking up my Bible from the dining table, I sat on the mahogany chair and flicked through the pages. As I came to Isaiah 52, the small, round glow of my flashlight immediately illuminated verse 7. How beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of him who bring good news. A little further, on verse 11 and 12, jumped out of the page at me. Depart, depart, go out hence. But you will not leave in haste, and you shall not go in flight, for the Lord will go before you, and the God of Israel will be your rear guard. As I continued reading, I was also struck by the promise of verse 15. For that which has not been told them, then they will see, and that which they have not heard, they shall understand. I turned off the flashlight and sat in the darkness, pondering what I had just read. God had answered my question. Of that, I was certain. I was to go to Tanzania. My only question now was, how was I going to break the news to the rest of my team? By the time I emerged the next morning, Ramona was busy in the kitchen making coffee, pouring boiling water over newly ground beans. Charles, the Ugandan evangelist, had just returned from the market with a loaf of freshly baked bread. Its aroma, mingled in the smell of the newly brewed coffee, filled the dining room. Dan was already at the table, biting into a large piece of juicy pink papaya from the well-laden fruit basket. I sat down and picked up a slice for myself, but I did not eat it. I was not hungry. I was too preoccupied with how I was going to break the news to my team. Ramona joined us at the table. Everything okay, Rudi? She asked, noting my uneaten papaya slice. Even at this early hour, her light brown hair was immaculately teased with every strand in place. Dan reached out for another piece of papaya. I must say, you seem rather subdued this morning, Rudi, he commented, munching into the fruit. With his healthy appetite, it amazed me that he retained his lithe figure. Is there something on your mind? By now, Tom and Natalie had made their appearance. Well, I do have something I want to share with you all, I confessed. I guess now is as good a time as any. Sorry for the cough. Placing my half-drunk cup of coffee on the table, I pushed back on my chair. The cloud of utensils silenced. Breakfast was forgotten as all 5 pair of eyes fixed their gaze on me. I decided to plunge right in. Starting from the beginning, I explained how stirred I had felt when I had first heard from Floyd about the Chinese communists in Africa, especially those working on the Tanzam Railway project. I told them of my response to Brother Andrew's challenge to reach these Chinese and my thoughts of leaving the team in Soroti and making a fact-finding tour on my own to Dar es Salaam. I paused, watching for their response. All eyes remained glued on me, but no one said a word. I went on to tell them about my prayer time the night before and how God had spoken so clearly through verses 7, 11, and 12 in Isaiah 52. At that, our Kiwi member Tom let out a low whistle. Wow, mate, I reckon God's really spoken to you. Dan nodded slowly. Yes, I think you're meant to go, Rudi. Don't worry about us. We'll be fine. We'll manage. No sweat, Natalie affirmed. And we'll be backing you all the way in prayer, Ramona added. Thanks for your support, I said, putting my now lukewarm mug of coffee to my lips. I really appreciate it. Now I had shared my news and their reaction was so positive, a weight lifted from my shoulders and I had breathed easier. While I had no doubt God had confirmed my plans, it meant a great deal to know the team was behind me. The only dissenting voice was Charles, the Ugandan. You realize, Rudi, that these Chinese are cloistered together in camps and not easy to get to, he warned. One of my friends tried to give Swahili literature to a Chinese worker and almost lost his job over it. I nodded, but did not comment. And what about contacts in Dar es Salaam? Do you know anyone there? No, I don't, I admitted. But then Rolly and I didn't have any contacts when we took our Bibles into Bulgaria, and look how God led us. Despite Charles's more sobering assessment, my spirit was not dampened. Once I had phoned Floyd in Nairobi and got the okay from him, nothing could stop me. I had a green light. I was going for it. Isaiah 52:12 said not to go out in haste, so I knew I was not to rush the trip. I therefore gave myself a week to prepare and find out as much as I could about the Chinese situation in Tanzania. Here in Soroti, however, information was limited. A few days after I had made my decision to go, the director of a missionary organization in Tanzania, a German named Fritz, came to visit. We had been expecting him for some time, but that he had chosen to visit us now, just days before my proposed departure for Tanzania, seemed yet another divine confirmation. I was out selling literature in the marketplace when Fritz arrived. By the time I returned, he was already sitting relaxing in one of our cane lounge chairs, enjoying a cool fruit juice. Overhead, the metal roof creaked and groaned as it expanded under the sun's morning rays. Dumping my carton of tracts on the table, I flipped on the overhead fan, which instantly stirred its welcome breeze. Man, sure is a scorcher out there, I remarked, wiping the beads of sweat from my forehead and going over to greet him. Normally, after coming in from the heat of the market, I took a rest, but not today. Now that Fritz was here, I did not want to waste a moment. Let me get a drink and I'll come and talk. I was eager to glean from him every bit of information I could about the Chinese. He was my very first, in fact, my only contact in Tanzania. Grabbing a bottle of Coke from the fridge, I pulled up a chair beside him, and after some brief preliminary chatter, steered the conversation around to the Chinese working in Tanzania. I was disappointed to find that he had limited local information about the situation in the capital. His organization was centered a few hundred kilometers west of Dar es Salaam, but he did have a broad understanding of the general position of the Chinese working in Africa and seemed willing to air his knowledge. After about half an hour of non-stop questioning, Fritz turned to me. Why the interest in the Chinese, Rudi? I began to explain to him the purpose of my forthcoming visit to Tanzania. His eyebrows puckered. Rudi, do you really know what you're undertaking? He said, shaking his head. What you're proposing is not only difficult, it's almost impossible. He began to enumerate the nearly insurmountable barriers I would need to get over if I was going to successfully evangelize these communist Chinese. First, the camps are scattered over many hundreds of kilometers in very isolated areas. Second, it's not only hard to get to them physically, but the government forbids it. Fritz counted off each point on his fingers. Third, settlements are ringed with barbed wire. Fourth, foreigners to the area are closely scrutinized. Fifth, as part of their deal to receive foreign aid from the Chinese, the Tanzanian government promised not to allow any religious input into the group. Fritz paused, his right index finger resting on his left middle finger as his voice took an almost fatherly tone. Rudi, with your white face, you could stand it a mile away if you tried to get into one of the camps. I'd be very surprised if you found any long-term missionary in Tanzania who would help you. No one would want to take the risk of losing their visas for the sake of evangelizing a few thousand Chinese. I doubt if even the local African Christians would have anything to do with it. Fritz's comments brought me down from my spiritual high with a resounding thump, and over the next 24 hours, I soberly assessed the sheer impossibility of the mountain I was considering scaling. Sorry, I seem to be having trouble with one of my streams. Oh, we'll upload it later. So, Fritz's comment brought me down from my spiritual high with a resounding thump, and over the next 24 hours, I soberly assessed the sheer impossibility of the mountain I was considering scaling. I squarely faced the potential pitfalls and dangers. I had to agree with him. This was not an easy mission. But as I assessed the risk, rather than weakening my resolve, it only made me more determined. Within me arose an even greater excitement than before. In my heart stirred the same cry of faith Caleb uttered when he and the rest of the Israelites stood at the edge of the promised land. Lord, give me this mountain where the giants are. I have no doubts. The instructions in verses 7 and 11 of Isaiah 52 are precise. How beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of those who bring good news. Depart, depart, go out hence. I knew I had heard from God. If I were to back out now, like Jonah, I would be disobeying Christ's direct command to me. Obviously, I would have to find a more subtle method than usual to get the message across to the communist Chinese. But because I was being sent as God's emissary, I was confident he would reveal his way to disseminate his word among those people. I was equally certain that he would have someone in Dar es Salaam who would help me. Exactly who and how I would locate that person, I had no idea. A few days later, leaving the sorority team in Dan's capable charge, I made the bus trip to the airport and there boarded a 20-seat twin-engine turboprop plane for Dar es Salaam. As a small plane circled the city and came into land, my confidence remained high. I still did not have any Christian contacts in the city, but as he had done for Roli and me in Bulgaria, I was sure God had gone ahead and prepared the way. Collecting my gray suitcase and a piece of paper in which Fritz had written the name of a cheap downtown Christian hostel, I walked outside the airport into the sun-alike conditions of Dar es Salaam. How could people work in these temperatures? My thoughts flashed in sympathy to those thousands of Chinese sweating it out under the sun on the railway track. After only a few minutes in this intense heat, my shirt was already soaked with perspiration. I had intended taking a bus into town, but quickly abandoned that idea and decided instead to splurge a few precious shillings on a taxi. I sat back, enjoying the welcome breeze coming through the open window of the beat-up Morris as it rattled its way past tall palm trees and dirt-streaked, white-plastered houses that lined the route into the city. The nearer we got to the center of the capital, the more densely concentrated the houses became. Conditions here were clearly more rundown than in Nairobi. We pulled up outside a black, moss-covered concrete building about a block back from the sea. It was fronted with a tired blue painted sign on which was written in English, "The Luther House." It was not the Hilton, but it would be more suitable for my pocket than the outrageous fare the taxi driver was demanding from me. Before starting my journey, I had insisted that he put the meter on. I now realized it must have been rigged. 10 shillings? I questioned him again. 10 shillings, he repeated, doggedly pointing to the meter. I had no way of proving that I, like so many other unsuspecting tourists, had been taken for a ride. So I reluctantly pulled out my wallet and counted out the unfamiliar currency. That would be the last taxi ride for me. From now on, my transport would be by local bus, regardless of the temperature. I climbed the few steps into Luther House and checked myself in. The next morning, having suffered a restless, sweaty night, I sat down for a community-style breakfast. I looked around at the handful of guests for someone to speak to. Maybe one of them could lead me to the local Christian who would be prepared to join hands in my venture of reaching out to the communist Chinese railway workers. I needed someone who was on fire for God and who had enough spiritual gumption to disobey the national law, which forbade anyone to evangelize those living in the barbed wire camps. Among the many businessmen at the breakfast table, there was one lady. I struck up a conversation with her and discovered she was a missionary. We chatted about our mutual interest in reaching the lost, but heeding both Charles and Fritz's word of caution, I hesitated to divulge the real reason for my visit to Dar es Salaam. I chose my words carefully. "Do you happen to know where there is a Christian bookshop?" I asked, in what seemed a God-inspired approach. Bookshops usually had a good knowledge of the local church scene. Maybe someone there could direct me to a lively church that would give me the support I needed. "Yes, I was at a Christian bookshop only yesterday," my breakfast companion responded. "It's only a few minutes' walk from here." I scribbled down the name and street on my paper napkin. "You shouldn't have any difficulty finding it," she assured me. She was right. The modest one-room shop merged in with the rest of the block, but from the covers of the few books displayed in the windows, along with the crosses and other Christian memorabilia, I knew I had found the right store. The words from my early morning reading of Psalm 37 came back to me. "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act. He will bring forth your vindication as the light, and your right as the noonday sun." "Thank you, Lord," I prayed in silent gratitude. "Thank you for going ahead of me." As I walked through the door, a diminutive, gray-haired European lady behind the counter smiled at me sweetly. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked in soft, strongly foreign accented English. Well, I'm hoping you can, I answered, returning her smile. No one else was in the store, which was to my advantage. Even so, now I was actually face to face with a local Christian here in Dar es Salaam. I was not sure where to begin. I shifted uneasily. I'm Swiss German, I started. The lady's smile broadened. I'm from Sweden, she said, warmly shaking my hand. Welcome to Tanzania. She seemed so open and friendly, I was sure that this was the person God had set in my path to help me. So, throwing caution to the wind, I plowed right in. I explained that I was with an organization called Youth of the Mission, and that our aim was to release young people into world evangelism. That sounds wonderful, young man, she said brightly. I only flew in last night. I don't know any local Christians, and only have a few days here, I continued. Well, is there anyone I can introduce you to, or any way I can help you with your mission, she offered. I think you might, I said, leaning closer to her across the counter. Even though we were the only two in the store, I did not want the risk of any unwanted ears eavesdropping on my conversation. I lowered my voice a few decibels as I confided. God's been laying a concern on my heart for the communist Chinese. I'm looking for someone who might. She did not let me finish my sentence. As soon as I mentioned Chinese, her face instantly darkened and her demeanor changed. From a charming, helpful shop assistant, she was transformed to a paranoid freak. Waving her hands agitatedly, she began shooing me out of the shop like some unwanted stray dog. No, you can't make contact with the Chinese. It's absolutely forbidden by law. I doggedly resisted her frantic attempts to get rid of me. She was my only Christian contact in Dar es Salaam. If this lady refused to give me a lead, I did not know who else I could turn to. Please, I pleaded, can't you just give me the names of some local Christian people? Well, there's a Baptist church down the road, she said, calming down a little, and then, as I turned to leave, added offhandedly, you could try Pastor Malia. He lives in Temeke, near the community center, but, she added almost as an afterthought, don't try him during the day. He's only home in the evenings. Thank you very much, I said, making a mental note of his name as I stepped out from the relative comfort of the fan-cooled bookshop into the sweltering heat of the mid-morning sun. Pastor Malaya of Temeke. No point in trying him now, if he wasn't home until evening. I may as well walk to the Baptist church down the road. My visit to the Baptist church drew a blank. The senior pastor was away, and when I asked his African assistant a carefully phrased question about the Chinese railway project, he was non-committal. It's not our area of interest, he said curtly as we stood talking at his office door. He was equally unhelpful when I asked about contacts with anyone who could assist me. He did, however, give me the direction about the right bus to the closest Chinese settlement. Back out on the street, I glanced at my watch. 11 a.m. Where do I go now, Lord? My only other lead was Pastor Malaya in Temeke. But, according to the bookshop lady, he would not be home at this hour of the day. I decided, therefore, to take a bus and visit the Chinese settlement. I found my way to the central bus station and stood waiting for the right one to turn up. The terminal was a hive of activity. African women, balancing huge open woven baskets of fruit and vegetables on their heads, were hopping on and off the buses. Some wore black Islamic veils, but unlike the fundamental Muslim women, their veils only covered their heads and not their faces. I even saw a scrawny goat being dragged on by its African owner. But, although buses rolled in and out with regular monotony, I could not see any with the right number to take me to the Chinese camp. The midday sun beat mercilessly through the flimsy shelter, and the heat radiated up from the black pitch pavement. I looked round for a seat, but there was none. By now my legs ached, my t-shirt dripped with perspiration, and my frustration was growing by the minute. Had the Swedish shop assistant deliberately led me astray and given me the wrong bus number? When the next bus pulled in, I turned to the African man standing next to me and pointed to it. Where does this go? He reeled off names I had never heard of. One, however, arrested my attention. Temeke. Temeke? I repeated. He nodded vigorously. Temeke was where Pastor Malia lived, but the shop assistant had said he would not be home until evening. It was still only early afternoon. I had no idea how far Temeke was. I did not know if it was a suburb of Dar es Salaam or a separate town. And when I arrived, how could I find this Pastor Malaya? I did not even have the name of his church. The only clue the shop assistant had given me was that his house was next to the community center. I could be on a wild goose chase. Yet I felt a strange urgency to board the bus. As I flopped into a seat towards the back, peace settled into my heart. I knew I had made the right move. I looked around the half-empty bus. My attention was drawn to an African man sitting by himself in the front. Go and sit with that man, I felt the Lord prompt me. In obedience, I left my seat at the back and slipped into the aisle seat bus beside him. He glanced casually at me, and then, as the bus lurched forward, he reverted his gaze out the window at the passing scene of palm trees and the moss-stained plastered houses that gradually thinned out as we left behind the more built-up area of Dar es Salaam. I noted the impressive multi-lens camera slung around the African's shoulder. What great pictures I've been able to record of Africa if I had equipment like that, I thought, with more than a tinge of envy. Start a conversation with the man, the Holy Spirit whispered in my heart. Using the camera as my starting point, I pointed to his camera and remarked, beautiful piece of equipment you've got there. He looked at it admiringly. Yes, it's a good camera all right, he responded in excellent English. I'm a newspaper reporter, so it's pretty essential to my work. Having broken the ice, the conversation flowed easily. I learned that he'd been raised hundreds of kilometers to the northwest of Dar es Salaam at the foot of the famous Mount Kilimanjaro. But he had readily traded life in his tribal homeland for a job in the capital. It was such a wonderful opportunity. I leapt at the chance to move here. I haven't been back to my home village in years, he explained. As a journalist, he might be able to give me some inside information about the communist Chinese working at the Tanzan Railway project, so I raised the topic with him. The Chinese? They're doing a great job, he enthused. A real boom to the national economy. His political position so evidently expressed, I thought it was wise to drop the subject to the Chinese. He might become curious about my interests and start asking awkward questions. I did not want a repeat encounter of the kind we had had with the reporter in Jerusalem, and my assignment here in Tanzania railroaded before it had even started. This African reporter was far less bombastic, but he was still a reporter. I therefore deliberately changed the subject. Besides, I had a more pressing matter in my mind. I was concerned I might miss my stop. We'd been traveling for nearly half an hour, and while we were still in Dar es Salaam, I judged by the increase of vegetation between homes that we were in the outer suburbs. I had no idea where I should get off. This is my first visit to Temeke, I explained to my travel companion. Would you be able to show me where to get off? No problem, he said obligingly. I'm getting off there myself. Thank you, I said gratefully. A few minutes later, dust swirling, the bus squealed to a halt and the reporter and I dismounted. The bus pulled away, leaving both of us covered in a fine layer of dust. Carefully brushing off his camera, the reporter turned to me. Where do you need to go in Temeke? I'm here to visit someone I've never met, I replied, feeling decidedly awkward. His name is Pastor Malia. Malia, that's interesting, my African companion mused half to himself and half to me. I used to know someone by that name. We grew up as kids in the same tribal village in Kilimanjaro. In fact, we were best friends. I wonder if he's related. Where does this Pastor Malia live? Feeling more foolish, I confess. I don't know. I was told his house is next to the community center. Well, that's the community center there, the reporter said, pointing to a building on the other side of the road. Look, you can see the church about 100 meters further on. That must be Malia's house, right next to it, I said, thankful to have found it so easily. I really appreciate your help. I reached out my hand in farewell. Now I had found Malia's place. I was anxious to get going, but I was not about to brush off my new friend so easily. I'd like to come and meet this man for myself, he answered. Is it all right if I come with you? Well, yes, of course, I replied. I could hardly say anything else. Without the man's assistance, I would probably not have found my way here. Anyways. But how could I talk with a pastor about such a sensitive issue as evangelizing the Chinese with a pro-communist newspaper reporter present? I did not have a choice. The journalist was already striding towards the house. Oh well, it's unlikely Malay will be at home anyways this early in the afternoon, I consoled myself as I followed him down the narrow sandy track which led to the steepled, white-plastered church. Just before the church, we turned left up a path that led to the house. I knocked on the unpainted wooden door, which was shaded by a fruit-laden papaya tree, and waited. There was no reply. I knocked again. Then, trying to disguise my relief, I turned to the newspaper reporter. Looks like he's not home. Don't worry. I'll fill in the time and come back later this evening. We had started retracing our steps and were already halfway back down the path when I heard the door squeak behind us. I turned around to see an African, whom I guessed to be in his mid-30s, framed in the door. Rubbing his eyes and obviously awakened from his mid-afternoon nap, he looked surprised, almost shocked as he saw us. Staring intently at the newspaper reporter, he asked, "Are you looking for someone?" "Yes, we're looking for Pastor Malia," the reporter replied. "I'm Pastor Malia," the African responded. "Please come in." More than a little stunned by his ready invitation, we stepped over the threshold into his simple but comfortably furnished living room. At his directing, we sank with gratitude into wooden armchairs. The skimpy foam cushioning offered a little relief to our weary joints, but above a fan swirled his welcome breeze onto our sweaty, dust-covered faces. Pastor Malia disappeared into a small adjoining kitchen and returned minutes later with 2 large plastic glasses of iced water. I gulped mine down gratefully. Sitting himself in a seat opposite, he looked at us quizzically. "What's the purpose of your visit?" he asked politely. Unable to divulge the true nature of my mission, I instead talked in general terms, explained about Youth of the Mission, how we were an international missions organization, had teams in Kenya and Uganda, and were interested in coming to Tanzania. "We'd certainly be willing to assist in any way we can," Pastor Malia said. But although he seemed genuinely interested, it was clear I did not have his full attention. Even as he was talking to me, his eyes kept averting to the newspaperman. Suddenly turning to him, he blurted out, "Don't I know you?" "I think you may," the reporter answered, giving his name. "I'm pretty sure we grew up in the same village." The pastor's eyes lit up with immediate recognition. Of course. I thought you looked familiar when I saw you at the door. Why, I haven't seen you in years." Standing up, they warmly embraced, and then sitting back, lapsed into the vernacular tongue. I sat as an uncomprehending eavesdropper, but I could tell from their excited tones and animated hand gestures that they were probably reminiscing over childhood memories and chatting about mutual friends. Switching back to English, Pastor Malay excused his rudeness and explained how they had been close buddies as children, but had each gone their separate ways and until now had totally lost contact with one another. He clearly recognized this as a God-given opportunity, and switching between his native tongue and English so that I could also participate, he began to share the gospel with his long-lost friend. Sorry, it's midnight here, a bit tired. As I observed Malaya uncompromisingly present the gospel to his liberal-minded friend, I could see he was a man of vigor and faith. Only a few Christians I had so far met here in Tanzania, he was the only person who had the spiritual zeal and vision necessary to buy into my project of reaching the Chinese. The longer I listened to him debate the claims of Christ, the more convinced I became that this was the man God had prepared to be my Tanzanian co-worker. Just how prepared I had yet to find out. As if by divine cue, the reporter, who until this point had been totally engrossed in the conversation, glanced at his watch. 6 o'clock. Goodness, I didn't realize it was that late. I must get going. He rose abruptly from his chair and headed towards the door. I've got business I must attend to. Pastor Malia got up to see him off. I sat alone in the semi-darkness as they chattered their farewells outside. Delicious smells of cooked banana wafted through the kitchen where Malaya's wife was preparing the evening meal. I suddenly realized how hungry I was. With all the activity of the day, I had not eaten since breakfast. Overriding these natural pangs of hunger, however, was an even more urgent desire, my need to reveal my vision for the Chinese. By now, the African night had dropped its curtain of darkness. Malaya returned, switched on the light, and sitting down in the thin foam-cushioned chair opposite, looked me squarely in the eyes and came straight to the point. Now that we're finally alone, Mr. Lack, let's talk. What's the real reason for your visit? I warmed instantly to this straightforward, no-nonsense matter. He was my type of person. Call me Rudi, I said. Simon, he responded, extending his hand in renewed welcome. So, Rudi, why have you really come? I opened my mouth to speak, but before I had a chance, Simon continued. You may have noticed my reaction when I opened the door to you this afternoon. Well, yes, I must admit I did. I thought it was probably because we were complete strangers, and you weren't expecting us. That's true. I wasn't, but in another way I was, he answered mysteriously. My curiosity aroused, I leaned forward. What do you mean? 2 nights ago, he went on to explain, I had a dream in which I saw my news reporter friend coming to my house with a white man, someone I had never met. That white man, I now realized, was you. I stared at him in semi-disbelief, barely comprehending what I had just heard. You saw me in a dream 2 nights ago? I repeated. That's right, he answered matter-of-factly. So I know God has brought you here, but why? What's the real purpose of your visit, Rudi? Greatly bolstered by this divine confirmation, I set all hesitancy aside and fully opened my heart, shared in detail with Simon the flow of events that had led me to this incredible encounter. I told him of my conversation with Floyd and my initial reaction to Brother Andrew's call to evangelize the Chinese workers in Africa. I shared my growing yearning to accept this challenge, but with a targeted focus on the Tanzam Railway project. I told him about the specific direction I had received from Isaiah 52 and of my journey of faith here to Dar es Salaam, despite the fact that I had no local contact. I shared how I had gone to the Christian bookstore and the Swedish lady's fearful reaction when I mentioned the Chinese. I explained how she had given me his name, but stressed that I should only come in the evening because he was not home in the afternoon. She's right, Simon interjected. I'm seldom home during the day. Today was a rare exception. But how did you get to meet my boyhood friend? I planned to visit a Chinese camp, but when no bus came, I decided to take the bus to Temeke instead, I explained. That's when the Spirit directed me to move from my seat at the back and go and sit next to your news reporter friend. It was now Simon's turn to open his eyes in amazement. He shook his head slowly. That's incredible. Our church has been praying for months about ways to reach the Chinese. Your coming is a direct answer to our prayer. We both sat momentarily in stunned silence as we reflected on the intricate weaving of events that had brought us together. Behind us, dishes clattered as Simon's wife laid the table for supper. Rising to his feet, Simon beckoned me to the plain wooden table. Come eat with us, Rudi, he said, pulling out a stool for me to sit on. Steam mingling with the delicious aroma of cooked bananas that wafted from one of the 2 large bowls to the center of the table. The other was piled full of fluffy white rice. I dug hungrily into the ample portion that Simon's wife piled onto my plate. Our dinner conversation centered on one topic, how we could effectively evangelize the forbidden community of Chinese without raising suspicion. We can't employ the usual methods, Simon said, resting his knife and fork on the side of his plate. I've thought about that, I nodded, accepting another generous spoonful from Simon's wife. The authorities are watching us like hawks, Simon added. Whatever method of evangelism we use, we have got to be very careful not to draw attention to ourselves. So open our meetings or literature distribution is out. Simon put his utensils firmly down on his empty plate as if to emphasize his point. Absolutely. A possible strategy was beginning to form in my mind. I wonder, I said, my final portion of rice suspended temporarily in midair. I wonder if there may be just a way we could use literature. Impossible, Simon quickly countered. They would pick it up immediately. I don't know, I said, explaining to him about Brother Andrew's Open Door Ministry and how they had produced a gospel imitation of Chairman Mao's Red Book. Maybe we could do an African version, I said. That could work, Simon said with interest. That could just be our answer. Shortly after the meal, some missionaries came for the evening. I noticed Simon stayed quiet about reaching the Chinese, so I took my cue from him. I had no idea where these missionaries stood regarding evangelizing the Chinese, but, like Simon, realized the wisdom of remaining silent. The missionaries offered to drive me back to the Luther guest house, so we did not have a chance to talk further that night. But I was not too concerned. Simon had already arranged to meet with me the following day and take me to a Chinese camp. As I stood with him the next day in front of the crudely built wooden huts that made up the Chinese compound, my desire to reach them for the gospel was fanned by a fresh urgency. It was a barbed wire prison, one that not only kept the Chinese in, but also effectively kept the African and foreigner out. Over the next few days, as Simon and I continued to meet together, Over the next few days, as Simon and I continued to meet together, we worked through the practicalities of our strategy. The dream of reaching the Chinese was fast becoming a realistic possibility. It was only a matter of time before they would have the opportunity to hear God's personal message of love for them. I resolved to make that time as short as possible. By the end of my week in Dar es Salaam, my friendship with Simon was cemented. He had also reached some definite decisions. I would return to Europe, recruit more people to come to Africa on a short-term mission outreach, and also contact Big Brother Andrew about printing a Chinese gospel version of the Little Red Book for Africa. Our newly recruited team would then be responsible for bringing that literature into Tanzania. On his part, Simon would encourage his church to continue to pray and look for ways to get the gospel portions into Chinese hands. You have my 100% support, Simon encouraged me as we exchanged final farewells at the Dar es Salaam airport. You supply the literature, and I'll take full responsibility to see that it gets into the right hands, he promised. I'll certainly do everything I can, I assured him. We hugged like brothers. I was reluctant to leave. It had been an exhilarating, fulfilling few days, and I was going to miss Simon Malay's company. As the plane took off, I strained to see the last glimpse of the sprawling coastal capital of Dar es Salaam before it disappeared under the clouds. My heart was still there, particularly with those thousands of communist Chinese rail workers. I reclined in my seat, reflecting on Simon's confident commitment to me. We would need thousands of pieces of literature to reach the Chinese. The cost would be enormous, and I had absolutely no financial backing. Neither did I know anybody in Africa who could print the material. It was not going to be an easy task, but God's stamp was so clearly on this venture that despite the overwhelming odds, I felt quietly assured he would work out the details. All right, well, that's the end of chapter 9. It was a long one, about 20 pages. Next chapter is called Faith Renewed. So I'm looking forward to finding out how actually they do talk to the Chinese, because I think, what was it, just in the preface for the book, they talk about being approached at gunpoint by the Chinese. So hopefully the next one will be an exciting time as we get to find out just how God has led them. So again, thank you very much for tuning in to the Missionary Coach Show. This series that we're doing right now is the Missionary Stories series over at missionarystories.org. If you head over there, you can subscribe. If you're watching this, wherever you're watching it, you can like it, subscribe, comment. Just let us know what you think. And I look forward to hearing from you. This is a value for value podcast. So if you find this valuable, you can give your time, talent, or treasure. Head over to billhutchison.org, which is the same website as all the others, but just head over there and you can find out how you can support the full-time volunteer missions that I'm involved with, which includes doing podcasting, communication. I've actually been tying in with the local Youth of the Mission base here in Adelaide, and been doing this since 1999, so a little while now. So again, thank you very much, and I really do look forward to hearing from you and reading the next chapter called Faith Rewarded next week. So thank you very much, and I will catch you next time.